$5.8 billion over the next biennium, which is a significant increase. And you'll see that's the preponderance of the new spending is actually already done. Before we add any new programs, that's just what's assumed that the cost will be in this next biennium. So don't be fooled by those that will say that we have $4.5 billion or any number above that to spend on new items. That is simply not true. The fact is that that revenue that's anticipated to come in next year has already been consumed by education and other maintenance level increases. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Ormsby to go through some budget highlights.
Thank you, Pat, and good afternoon. Would like to, just for points of clarification, folks look at the budget in a multitude of ways. We had to do the same thing. We have numbers spanning 5 years, whether it's the supplemental year that we are currently in, the upcoming biennium, or the outlook period, which is a span of 5 fiscal years. And we're going to be giving numbers that will be accurate, but to the extent that you're interested in specific breakdowns, we'll accommodate your interest outside of this venue. We spent hundreds of hours on this budget, making thousands of decisions, and those hours and those decisions were a result of our communication with our constituents collectively when we were back home, and as we have heard from advocates and constituents while we've been here. They address questions like, my kid suffers from a serious mental health issue. How is he going to get services to address his problem? How am I supposed to pay for my daughter's higher education? It's not in our budget. We can't afford it. How are you going to help my family keep our health care? And what are we going to do about our neighbors and our friends that are facing serious housing crisis? Those issues and many more are addressed in this budget. We do our best to answer these questions and prioritize the House Democratic spending plan to address those issues, specifically in behavioral health. More than $200 million in this upcoming biennium, which begins on July 1st, which grows to nearly $600 million when we do this 4-year outlook, which we are compelled by statute to do. This is not our choice, this is law. And so we have to budget for 2 and for 4 years. Long-term care and developmental disabilities, $262 million in the upcoming biennium beginning on July 1, including $62 million in this biennium and $150 over that 4-year period for supportive living. So those are folks that are living in the community with developmental disability challenges and the staff that provide services to them while they are there. We know that there are challenges in this market for attracting and retaining qualified people to provide that therapeutic care for those among us with developmental disabilities. Children, youth, and families, something that is a particular interest to me and to our caucus and to the general public. We'll be spending $119 million in the upcoming biennium, growing to over $300 million in 4 years, which will address early learning, foster care, etc. $90 million we'll be spending in the upcoming biennium on corrections and criminal justice over the 2-year period, which includes $11 million in the upcoming biennium to address the backlog for the testing of sexual assault rape kits. And just to clarify, in conclusion, as Representative Sullivan mentioned, $5.8 billion of this spending plan is maintenance level. It is a term of art that means we, in order to continue doing what we are doing today in the upcoming 2 years, it will be an additional $5.8 billion. That accounts for caseloads, that accounts for inflation and all the varying factors that affect what it costs to deliver these services. This spending plan, in addition to that, is $2.3 billion. June?
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to take a minute now to drill down a bit on our behavioral health and housing investments. Behavioral health is an issue that, although we've made significant investments over the last few biennium, continues to be a very large need in communities across the state. I think every one of us is affected either personally within our own immediate family or certainly within our circle of friends by folks who need and have trouble accessing either mental health care or substance use disorder treatment. We are working again in this biennium to address those issues for our friends and neighbors. We are expanding behavioral health patient beds in the community. So for our folks who need to be civilly committed, we want to be able to move them out of our state institutions and into the community. And to that end, we are investing $92 million this biennium, which will grow to $240 million in the four-year outlook. For our state hospitals, we do need to continue to maintain our state hospitals, and in order to properly staff those hospitals and provide for the safety of the staff and patients there, we are investing $136 million this biennium. We have been under a court order called the True Blood case around mental health and issues patients. And there's been a settlement reached in that court case, and we are providing $76 million of funding in this biennium to comply with that settlement. And finally, in the behavioral health space, our speaker has been here for, speaker for 20 plus years and had never passed a bill. So we allowed him to pass a bill this year, which will fund the startup of a new behavioral health hospital at University of Washington. And we did provide $23 million in the out biennium for the operations of that hospital. You'll hear more about the capital investment there during the capital budget briefing later. In housing, where we have a crisis driven by high rental costs across the state, we have invested $25 million this biennium in new additional funding for homelessness priorities, primarily operating revenue, operating costs for permanent supportive housing, and funding to address youth homelessness is in that package. And then for the Housing and Essential Needs Program, or HEN, these are vouchers that are driven out to the counties to be used for the folks who are most vulnerable in our communities. We have provided an additional $13 million on top of what's already in the base budget to provide funding for the HEN program. I'm going to turn it back to Tim.
Thank you, June. And want to hit on some highlights in the children, youth, and families and the environment areas, just some highlights. In human services, not only do we increase the number of slots by 1,500 in our ECAP program, we also include 6% vendor rate increase beginning this July 1. So 1,500 new slots and a 6% increase in the vendor rate for those providing that service to our early learners. Child care center rate increase. We know the pressures that are on both licensed in-home care providers and child care centers about being able to retain and attract employees in this very important early learning space. So we invest $25 million in the upcoming biennium to ensure that their doors stay open and they are staffed by qualified individuals. Behavioral rehabilitation services, those are services for our hardest to place foster kids. Foster kids with behavioral issues, medically fragile, the most difficult of our children to place, and we need to provide a safe environment and for them to recover and to thrive. And we're increasing by $18 million in the upcoming biennium the rates that we provide to providers to serve those foster kids who need more intensive care. In the environment space, we're making a robust contribution in disasters and wildlife preparedness, $13 million of general fund dollars and over $130 million in total dollars to spend on wildland fires and address natural disasters. On the southern resident killer whale, which has been a focus this year, we include $24 million in total funds this biennium on a number of proposals to increase habitat, prey, and other strategies to preserve our southern resident killer whale population. We passed earlier this year and pay for an historic low carbon fuel standards. The dollar amount is not large from the state investment, $2.2 million, but we fund this bill, which is a game changer for us in our deep concern regarding climate change. With respect to our state parks, $7.5 million in the current biennium for state parks operation and maintenance. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Representative Drew Hansen, who has for us a very innovative proposal on college and workforce investment. Representative Hansen.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. There you are. It took you a second. Good morning. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
It's afternoon.
It's not. It's 11:55. Okay, thank you. I'll look at the clock before I get up. All right, I'm Drew Hansen. I chair the College and Workforce Development Committee. Some of you might have seen in last week's Seattle Times an op-ed that was written jointly by Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, Anamari Kelsey, the president of the University of Washington, and Wayne Martin from the Community and Technical College System. This op-ed proposed a new workforce education investment. So a proposal that Chair Tarleton will talk about on the assessment side that would generate revenue to directly invest in our higher education system. We reflect this proposal in a bill that was dropped this morning, sponsored by me, by Chair Tarleton, and the rest of our budget team. You see behind us today, anyone who you don't recognize as a legislator is someone from the world of higher education. We have a broad and diverse group of students from the UW-Tacoma, UW-Seattle, Whitworth, and elsewhere. We have community college leaders, the president of Tacoma Community College, Dr. Ivan Harrell, the chancellor of the Spokane Community College System, Christine Johnson, the mayor of Pullman and trustee of the Spokane College System, and a community college graduate himself, Glenn Johnson, and Dr. Jan Yoshiwara, the head of the whole system. This is a very diverse group. Is diverse in race and age and gender and political affiliation, professional background, but we're here together because we all fundamentally believe every family in this state should have an opportunity to go to college or an apprenticeship or a short-term certificate and get a decent job and provide for your family. We do that in three ways following the proposal in the op-ed. Number one, we significantly expand financial aid. We fully fund the state need grant and make it a full tuition college or apprenticeship grant for families earning 70% of median family income or below, so about 60 grand for a family of four. And we provide additional scholarship supports for families earning up to 100% of the state's median income. Second thing we do, we significantly expand in preparing Washington students for Washington jobs. We take the state's Guided Pathways program, which is a way that our community college system has designed to make it easier for students to navigate community college, and we bring that to every college statewide so that we actually give students help in navigating college, which can be confusing and difficult. Third and last thing we do, we significantly expand the degrees and credentials and apprenticeships that we know are in demand in this economy. We have a problem right now in our community colleges where you can't hire a nurse educator to do a nurse educator job at $61,000 a year when they can go to a hospital and make $100,000 a year. So in collaboration with our faculty partners, including Professor Bill Line from Western, who's here with us, we've designed a proposal to give significant boosts to community college faculty in hard to hire occupations so we can start getting more students into those programs, through those programs, and into the economy to start earning a living. So now I'll turn it over to who? Chair Tarleton? Chair Tarleton, to talk about the details of how we pay for all this exciting stuff.
Well, it is good afternoon. I am Gail Tarleton, and I have the honor of working with my colleagues. You have heard about the priority investments to support all of the core needs and priorities in our state, but it's become clear to all of us that we still have really important work to do. The post-Great Recession economy should have produced enough revenue to fund current budget needs, but it didn't. Because we have the most upside-down, antiquated tax code in the country. It is disconnected from our diversified 21st century economy. Wealth continues to concentrate in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals who pay less and less into critical public investments as a proportion of their accumulated wealth. This wealth is not generating the revenue we need to serve the interests and needs of 7.5 million Washingtonians. Therefore, we are about to make an investment in building a quality of life for everyone in this state. We are taking a balanced approach to Washington investments. The extraordinary profits tax helps us invest in basic education, high-quality pre-kindergarten, and special education. The wealthiest Washingtonians who sell high-value assets, such as stocks and bonds, will pay a 9.9% tax on revenues on gains over $200,000 for a married couple in a calendar year. The progressive real estate excise tax finally gives the vast majority of our middle-income homeowners a bit of a break by creating Washington's first ever progressive real estate tax structure. 80% of the sellers who are selling their homes at below $500,000 will pay less taxes. They will get a tax cut. Another 18% of sellers who sell in the range of $500,000 to $1.5 million will pay the current rate. There will be no change. And for those 10% of sales above $1.5 million and above $7 million, they will pay more. Drew told you about this workforce education investment. This is vital for all of Washington's families. It is kind of investment you make once in a generation to support the students who will be our leaders in our state and economy for decades to come. So we have heard from the students and the parents and the business community that we need to do this, and we agree. So a subset of professional industries will pay a workforce education assessment on their business and occupation tax. It will go up from 1.5% to 1.8% for the vast majority of that subset of professional industries. And those companies that have extraordinary revenues around the world and the country will pay up to 2% or 2.5% to support advanced technology and advanced computing programs. With that, I think we're all open for questions.
All right. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the extraordinary profits tax. Is that the criticism of a capital gains tax, to which that seems pretty similar, is that it's very volatile. How is this not subject to the same criticism, or does it maybe address that concern?
Good question. The extraordinary profits tax is only in the budget starting in the second year. We need time to set it up because we do not have the systems in place in the Department of Revenue to implement it in the first year of the first biennium. So we are taking into consideration the fact that we don't generate revenues from it in that first year of the budget. Secondly, because it is viewed generally as a fairly volatile source of revenue, we don't put it into the critical day-to-day needs of this budget. It goes into the Education Legacy Trust account, which can support all education needs, which change over time and go back and forth over across various biennia. So it will be available, again, I think I mentioned this, for high-quality pre-kindergarten, for basic education in the K-12 system, for special education needs, and also for college and workforce development priorities as they might change over the course of various legislative sessions.
And I think the revenue that we've assumed in this budget is very responsible. I think that it will support the programs that we're funding in the budget.
Lawmakers and the governor have kind of broadly agreed on a 5-year proposal to move civil patients out of the state hospitals. Your proposal adds 540 workers for the state hospitals. I mean, by the time you get them in there, won't those patients be moved out to the civil system, or are these strictly for forensic tasks?
It's a combination. It will take longer than 2 years to move all the civil patients out as we develop capacity in the community. So we don't anticipate everyone being out. And we also have Eastern Hospital as well. Don't forget that. And then, of course, forensic patients will remain in both state hospitals even after we move civil patients out. But we will not complete that transition in the 2-year biennium.
Representative Sullivan? As you mentioned at the beginning, we're going to hear from the other side saying we don't need any of these revenue increases. Can you explain why that is not true, as you have said? Because you know that's what they're going to tell us. And what happens if we are forced to do this without any revenue increase?
So if we're forced to do this without revenue, remember, $4.5 billion is the bow wave on the K-12 education commitment that we made to those 1.1 million school kids. So we could not fund that, I suppose, if you didn't raise revenue. But, again, we made that commitment to those school children. And it's funny that, we've heard both sides of the aisle talk about the needs, and that's what this budget really focuses on, the needs of Washington State and the citizens that we represent. The increases in funding for behavioral health, the increases in funding for special education, the increases in funding for homelessness. Those were, we had bipartisan conversations at the start of session that we needed to make, improvements in this year. And that's what we do. We focus on the needs. And again, that $4.5 billion is entirely consumed. That revenue growth is entirely consumed in that education bow wave. And we are absolutely not going to make reductions in that education commitment.
Also anticipating what Republicans are going to say, that you have a $50 billion plus budget, and so there must be some waste, fraud, and abuse in there. What have you cut out of the budget in order to save money before adding money to it?
So one of the things that we really focused on was making sure that our budget is sustainable. And we've had some anticipated savings that haven't come true in prescription drugs, in Healthier Washington. And so we bought back those assumptions because we don't want that to be reflected in the Healthcare Authority where they weren't able to achieve those savings. They were entirely wholly unachievable, as they were described by one person. And so we really focused on making sure that the budget over the next several years is sustainable by ensuring that we're funding actual cost of what it takes to move the state forward.
I'm sorry, what out of the budget, though, have you cut? Programs that are not working, programs that you may have added too much money to, things that are being reduced in the budget before you're adding to it.
Sure, and we can get you a list of those areas where we've made some reductions. But again, we're recovering from the Great Recession. In many cases, we're getting back to the level where we were before the Great Recession hit. And so when you're looking at making reductions, our focus has been on getting back to where we were before, and hopefully in most cases, we're making new investments where citizens are really calling out for those added investments, and they're needed all across the state of Washington.
If I can add, this budget team has been very discerning consumers of the Commonwealth. So as far as the scrubbing for effectiveness, for example, some, and as Representative Sullivan said, some of those can be brought to you. We have leveraged federal priorities for dollars. We have looked under every nook and cranny, shook out the blankets and the couch cushions for resources prior to ever contemplating raising revenue. So we knew we were beginning with a bare bones approach to this thing, and where that gap appeared, that is where the revenue that you see is going towards. And as a reminder, just as we're beginning the recovery from the Great Recession is in 2012 when the McCleary decision came down, and that has been a huge focus of the legislature. You've seen quite a bit of activity in the course of the last 2 years to fund what is a multiple billion-dollar, multiple-year plan to address the challenges that the court weighed in on and their ruling. And by doing so, there were many other components of the budget that didn't receive that same attention, did not have that constitutional threshold that we needed to meet. And now is the time, in addition to increased K-12 support, we have had pent-up needs in several other areas of the budget that this document chooses to address.
Question. So you touched on it briefly. How important is the area of funding for homelessness, housing, the area of drug addiction, and mental health?
How important is it? I think it's important to most of the citizens of this state. So we did prioritize that. We, again, made very significant investments in behavioral health, which is both mental health and substance use disorder. And we made, again, significant investments, I would say, in the area of affordable housing and homelessness. They're priorities for our caucus. They're priorities that all of us hear from our constituents. They're priorities for the state of Washington.